All right, here we go. So the last video we put together here was on we were still dealing with the Civil War. Civil War is over now. Lee's going to surrender his forces, of course, to Ulysses S. Grant in April of 1865. The war's ended. It'll be a time of celebration in the Union. But then we've got to move on to what may be as critical a period as the Civil War, and that's Reconstruction. How are we going to rebuild the South? How are we going to rebuild areas of the North, whether it be the economy or whatever that needs to be readdressed following the war, and most importantly, bring these states back into the Union and deal with the situation of millions of blacks in the South who will eventually be freed, if not through Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation earlier during the war, certainly by the 13th Amendment here as we kick off Reconstruction. So we've talked a lot. I spent a lot of time in class talking about this. I'm going to try to take this first video up through presidential Reconstruction, so tackle about half of this. Roughly half of the content we have. I know we've been moving really quickly in class, so I want to give you guys an opportunity to see this material again. So first, let's take a look at the definition of Reconstruction. Now, I just pulled this out of the textbook, pulled it out of context there at the very beginning of the section on Reconstruction, and I think it's a good start for if we're trying to define the term Reconstruction. The period during which the United States began rebuilding after the Civil War. And it lasts from 1865 to 1877. And like much of history, dates can be debated. But I think for our purposes here, calling the period 1865 to 1877 Reconstruction is I think, serving a good purpose. So what's facing the nation following the Civil War? We've got a number of questions that the nation's leaders, particularly now we're talking about those leaders in Washington, are going to have to address. And they're not easy questions to deal with. First, on what terms should the defeated Confederate states be brought back into the Union? Second, who's going to decide on those terms? Should it be Congress that leads the process of Reconstruction, or should it be the President? That's going to be a real power struggle, and a constitutional. It's going to come down to really a constitutional issue and the division of powers. What system of labor is going to replace the plantation slavery? We've got now 4 million plus slaves thrust onto the scene now as freemen. How are we going to replace that amount of labor that is lost on southern plantations? If one of our goals is to rebuild the South and rebuild its economy, then how are we going to integrate those freedmen back into, or how are we going to integrate them for the first time into the political and social life of the South and of the Union as a whole, but particularly in the South? So Lincoln's going to come up with what will be the beginning of Reconstruction. It's going to get the ball rolling. Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction is the proclamation of amnesty and Reconstruction that he puts forth in 1865, and it comes to be known as the 10% plan. And as we've gone over several times in class, the basics of this plan are that once 10% of those that voted in the 1860 election within these southern states pledge a oath of loyalty to the Union, then the process of Reconstruction can begin. The process of rebuilding southern state governments, of reformulating state constitutions can begin. He excludes from that 10% any Confederate leaders, either political or military leaders, any Confederates that are on trial or being considered to be put on trial for war crimes. They would be excluded. And it meets with immediate opposition from radical Republicans. Republicans don't feel like it goes far enough. They're dissatisfied with the reach. For Lincoln, his primary objective is going to be bringing the South back into the Union as quickly as possible. For radical Republicans, it's going to be dealing with the issue of black rights and black freedoms in the aftermath of slavery. and so they're going to butt heads over this issue, and Lincoln will receive opposition from his own party, from within Congress, of this small group, a minority of Republicans in Congress who come to be called radical Republicans. They hold that position that addressing the issue of freedmen is going to be the most important issue in Reconstruction. Lincoln is also going to push for passage of the 13th Amendment and for its ratification. One of the conditions of states re-entering the Union will be that they ratify the 13th Amendment, of course, ending slavery. He'll also, under the Lincoln administration, will also see the formation of the Freedmen's Bureau under the War Department, whose job it will be to go into southern states and help slaves or help newly freed slaves in a transition to freedom, whether that be education, whether that be trying to establish some kind of employment, keep the peace many times between whites who are resentful of the end of slavery and newly freed slaves. So the Freedmen's Bureau will come into existence during the Lincoln administration. And then just a few days after the surrender of Lee at Appomattox Courthouse, Lincoln, of course, will be assassinated at Ford's Theater on a night out to the theater. And that's going to thrust into power the vice president, Andrew Johnson, who's only been vice president now for just a few days. Andrew Johnson is a Democrat, Southerner, stayed with the Union after his home state of Tennessee secedes from the Union. He had been governor of Tennessee. He had served in the U.S. Senate, and he had championed himself. He had put himself forward during his career in politics as a champion of the little guy, of the worker, of the small farmer, the honest yeoman, as he said. And he fought the power of the rich of the South, those that he called the slaveocracy. He referred to them as a pampered, bloated, corrupted aristocracy. And he saw rich people in the South, this aristocracy, as the real problem. And so he spends much of his political career fighting this class and trying to promote the causes of poorer people, of the little guy. However, he does not possess many of the characteristics that Lincoln possessed, and that's going to cause him some problems. He's known for stubbornness and inability to compromise. He's not going to take well and play nice with a Republican Congress when he starts getting down to the dirty business of Reconstruction. But all that aside, he is going to be the new president. He's sworn into office the very day that Lincoln dies, on April 15, 1865. And so now the issue of Reconstruction will land squarely in the lap of Andrew Johnson. So how are Lincoln and Johnson similar in their approach to Reconstruction? Johnson's going to kind of pick up where Lincoln left off. They're similar in that they both see as the primary objective the reestablishment of the Union and the reintegration of the southern states into the Union. And he's going to take off of Lincoln's 10% plan and really beef it up a little bit. In addition to excluding Confederate officials, he's also going to target, as has been his habit throughout his career, target rich landowners in the South. And he's going to include them as that group that would be excluded from the process of Reconstruction. And radicals greet this with a pleasant surprise. They like this. They see this as a departure or moving closer to where they want to be from where Lincoln started. However, they'll be quickly dismayed by the use of pardons by President Johnson. Johnson will put forth the idea that any of those excluded people, whether they be Confederate soldiers or officers, Confederate politicians, or landowners in the South, would be eligible for a pardon if they appealed to the president directly. And in the very first year of his term in office, he's going to grant over 8,000 pardons, over 13,000 pardons in total, when all is said and done. And what that will do is effectively bring back into power all of those who had held power prior to the Civil War. This is going to outrage radical Republicans in Congress. As these state governments begin to reform themselves, as new constitutions are written, what we're left with are very similar governments, right down to personnel and constitution as we had prior to the Civil War. Of course, ratification of the 13th Amendment was part of the program, and so at least we come out of this period with the 13th Amendment and the official constitutional grounding and the ending of slavery. So as soon as these new governments begin to take over operation of the states, we're going to see them move as far as they can back towards the direction of slavery without actually getting to slavery, which is of course prohibited by the 13th Amendment. But they'll pass a series of laws that come to be known as black codes, and with the primary intent of removing from freed blacks any rights or freedoms, freedom of movement, economic freedom, and really locking blacks in the South into a situation that resembled as close as you can get to slavery without actually reinstituting slavery. I shared this quote in class. Samuel McCall, a politician from Massachusetts, he said, these black codes established a condition but little better than that of slavery, with one important, at least in one important respect, even worse. Under slavery, it was in the interest of the slave owner to take care of slaves, to look out for their basic needs. With the absence of slavery now, some of those needs are not even being met for freedmen. And so in many respects, this newfound freedom has created a situation where blacks are sometimes worse off than they were before the 13th Amendment takes effect. What's the response going to be from Republicans? Well, it's going to be pretty swift and it's going to be pretty harsh. They immediately pass, or very soon after, Johnson kind of announces the end of Reconstruction in 1866, the successful Reconstruction of the South. The Republican-led Congress is going to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1866, effectively, or with the intent of trying to blunt some of those black codes, to institute rights and freedoms for the freedmen. Unfortunately, it doesn't come with much force of, it doesn't come with any type of enforcement, and so it's going to largely fall on deaf ears. In fact, as it reaches the president's desk, he's going to veto it. But Republican power has grown to the point in Congress, because of the reaction to presidential veto, that Congress will be able to overturn or override the veto. Of course, that's a pretty tall order, given that it takes a 2/3 majority to override a presidential veto. But now we have a coalition of radical Republicans and moderate Republicans who are positioning themselves opposite the president. Congress will pass or renew the Freedmen's Bureau with the Freedmen's Bureau Act of 1866, also vetoed by the president, and also overridden by Congress. This will be the year where we have midterm elections. The country, much like Congress, is dismayed by presidential Reconstruction, and Republican power in Congress will grow. And so now we've reached a point where a supermajority, really, a veto-proof majority is pretty much in place in Congress, and it will bring presidential Reconstruction to a rapid end. This is where we're going to pick up in the next video, and we'll start to talk about how radicals, how congressional Republicans are going to reconstitute Reconstruction, and basically scrapping Johnson's program and starting from scratch. We'll pick up there when I do the second video, probably tomorrow, but hopefully this will provide you with a good overview, maybe give you the opportunity to hit pause, which you don't have in class. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to send me those on Edmodo or bring them up in class. And hopefully we can be able to tie all this together in the next couple of days, so we have a big picture of how Reconstruction plays out following the Civil War. Until then, we'll see you soon.